This episode is sponsored by Linode. Do you need a Linux server for your latest creation? Then check them out. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit per second network connections, Intel E5 processors, and top-of-the-line hardware to run your servers on. It deploys Linux in seconds from a Linode cloud, and you can choose your Linux distribution and node location right from the manager. They have locations in Asia, North America, and Europe, and a sweet set of tools to make it easy to manage it. If the web interface isn't your thing, they also have an API and a command line. They also provide two-factor authentication, IPv6, DNS manager, plumbing, scaling, and everything else you would want. So get the most out of your Linux node by checking them out at linode.com or devchat.tv/linode. Hello and welcome to React Native Radio, episode 94. I'm your host, Nader Dabbit. Today on our panel, we have Spencer Carley from Handlebar Labs.
Hello, hello.
Lee Johnson of G2I.
What's up?
And our special guest today on the show is Jared Palmer, here to talk about forms and Formik in React. Welcome to the show, Jared.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So before we get into the topic, do you want to give a quick intro of yourself, who you work for, and kind of how you got into React development?
Sure. So my name is Jared Palmer, and I live in New York. I work for myself at a company called the Palmer Group, where we build applications and websites for large companies, startups, trade associations, governments. And I got into React probably around 2015 when I started actually becoming a developer. Before that, I was a designer and I ran a startup which ultimately got purchased by Unilever. And but I was non-technical at the time, and so after that, I sort of wanted to get into development and taught myself JavaScript. And React was like my first framework. So yeah, that's how I sort of started down that path, and been doing that every single day ever since. And yeah, I love it.
So you were doing non-technical work. Like, what was your specialty? Like, did you go to school for anything, or like, what were you working on before you got into programming?
Sure. So I thought I was going to be a banker. Believe it or not, I had like internship. I went to Cornell, like internship at Goldman Sachs. Like, was going to go down that route. I was a terrible banker, which is one big problem there. And but no, I thought I was going to be a banker. And before I graduated, I had this idea for an app that would put like lock screen ads on people's Android phones. And I ended up like finding a roommate who was an engineer, and he and I whipped up a prototype and basically got enough project funding from a couple different companies to go like build out the platform. And essentially it was like a CMS that would allow companies to put content not too dissimilar to what current day Snapchat stories feel like on people's lock screens. Again, Android only. So this was like 2013. So apps were doing all kinds of crazy things. And so instead of just going to take the job at Goldman, or to go down the finance route, I just became non-technical CEO / designer. And when it came time to like building a website, I figured I'd be scrappy and use my design chops to code some HTML and figure it out, and stuck with it and got hooked then. But still wasn't doing any like hardcore stuff, I would say. At the same time, around the sort of Node.js revolution, I guess, took off, and I learned. I was really frustrated with communicating what I had, like the vision I had, to some of my engineering and to my engineers that were working for me. And I found this tool, Framer.js, which is still around. Awesome company, Framer.com, if you're ever trying to prototype something. And from that, I learned CoffeeScript, and that's how I sort of got into JavaScript development. And then after that whole phase, just kept doing that, and sort of organically started this thing called the Palmer Group, which after the startup days were over, sort of just organic agency style work and consultancy. So that's how I sort of got there.
Very cool. So, what kind of development work do you do at the Palmer Group? Is it front end and back end, and
It's
like
full
just
stack
build full
and
applications?
infra. Yeah, we like probably best described as digital transformation. We'll take a company that is uh, maybe like a trade association, for example, that has legacy everything or has a database from last decade or the decade before that that's not even virtualized or something like that. Or they don't have virtualized servers or they don't use version control. And we'll take that, we'll go in, we'll put them on AWS, we'll modernize their entire deployment infrastructure, automate anything that needs to be automated, and then also take care of the front end, the back end, and design. So full stack digital transformation is probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah, that's cool. That's way more than app development. That's I haven't heard that combination before. That's very interesting.
So, how many people work with your company, or do you do contracting for some of your work?
Some contracting, but I just actually hired 2 more developers. They signed their offers, I guess, over last week, and so that'll bring us to about 4 or 5 people that are full time, and about 5 satellite contractors we work with. On this is the development team that I run, but the consultant, there are about 8 or 9 consultants that do more digital strategy work.
Oh wow! So that's a fairly big company, dude. That's pretty cool. Like, how has that process been? Like building your own company and stuff.
It's been cool. So basically, what ended up happening was my dad was had been running a consultancy, mostly digital strategy consulting for 2 decades, more or less. But after I sort of finished up with the startup, it seemed like we could join forces and do more. So basically, it's sort of 2 sides of the shop: the digital strategy and then also the development work. And so it's been fun to just work with my dad because he's in his 60s, and so I'm the youngest, so he's got nothing else to do except like do awesome stuff, and I also don't have a ton of responsibilities right now, so it's all in on this, and it's just really been fun to work with my family and stuff like that. So that's been cool. I don't think everybody gets to do that.
No way. That's very nice. And working in New York, I'm assuming you have some pretty cool clients that you probably get to work with.
It is fun. Not as cool as you probably think, but like sometimes actually I think that the less sexy clients sometimes are really, really more fun to work with because they're more open to, let's say, like more bleeding edge stuff sometimes. But regardless of the client, getting to pick your own tools is probably the best part of like my job. If there's something that we want to try out, maybe it's Reason, maybe it's something like React Native is now a very easy sell. When someone says I need an iOS app or that's on the table, right? So that's been fun.
So let's talk about Formik. What is the problem that Formik solves? Like, what is the issue with just building your own forms in React? Like, why do we need something like Formik? And kind of why were you unable to kind of use an existing project instead of building your own, knowing like enough that Formik is super popular and super useful? I'm just kind of curious, like, your thought process before you started building it, before it became successful, like, how that came about.
Yeah. So had a client, digital transformation, had to basically rebuild their internal administrative CRUD application. And, we talked about using a bunch of different tools. We did settle on React because we thought that there was a pretty decent chance that we're going to have to do some more complicated data visualization after we had done all this CRUD work. But we still haven't gotten to the data visualization part. But basically, this administrative dashboard was going to have tons of forms. And I knew that before I started the project. There was going to be a lot of modals and forms and confirmations and all that jazz. And I think it was like we estimated there's going to be 30 unique forms. And I'm not a big fan of the JSON schema type of store it in the database and then just print it all out. Doesn't give you as much fine-grained control. And especially when you use something as expressive as React, it seems like it just made more sense to not try and make this so rigid. So given that we needed some flexibility because the business logic was quite complex, I'd heard that Facebook doesn't use a form like abstraction at all. I talked with some people at Airbnb about what they were using. I think they were on Redux forms, so I tried that out for a while. And we don't really use Redux. I sort of stopped using Redux for the most part now, and so we're trying to also move away from that. I think people are sort of, while it is crazy popular, I think people are now moving away from it. But this app that we were starting, it was sort of, I guess this was about a year and a half ago, so it was like we didn't feel the need to get into Redux. So anyways, those were like the initial conditions. And then day like 4 of building this of this dashboard, I'm on form number 5, and it's clear that this is just not going to scale what's currently available. And I took another look at Redux form, and I had read of some articles about some issues it had, but then also I was browsing Stack Overflow, and Dan wrote a comment about like how form state is inherently ephemeral and local, and so storing it in Redux doesn't make any sense. So it seemed like, and since we weren't using Redux to begin with, adding Redux just for forms didn't make sense either, even though it's was at the time Redux form, and still is, one of the most popular form libraries out there. So those were sort of moving the ball forward, and I basically got the idea for Formik. I read code on GitHub like all day, and I was reading through Brent Jackson's examples for one of the many things that he's doing, and I found this little form helper that was built with Recompose, and it was kind of cool. It was a higher order component, and I was like, I'm gonna try this out, and so basically copy pasted it into the app that I was working on, and from there it just kind of grew, and I kept it in its own directory. And then the big decision was how we were going to validate stuff. And we looked at, I think there were 3 or 4 different candidates we looked at for validation. One option, of course, is just rolling it on our own. That didn't seem to make a lot of sense, though, just because it seems like we weren't going to, there was just like a lot of edge cases with validation that you probably want to stick with something that's been done before. So we looked at a bunch of them. Turns out that all of them were async, which is some kind of a weird twist to the whole thing. But we've settled on Yup. So Jay Quent's Yup, or Monastic Panic, I think, on Twitter. But it's a great library. It basically follows a builder pattern, much like prop types, and it works like, if you're from Node.js or you do that, it's got the same syntax as Joy, but it's packaged up for the browser, so it doesn't have a reliance on Moment.js, which is a gigantic time library. So once we had the validation, it's sort of, and this higher order component that we were kind of working on, it sort of made sense to just sort of combine it all together, and that's where the sort of spark happened. And yeah, that was sort of what the itch I was trying to scratch.
So what I find interesting, just off the bat, you're talking about how people are kind of moving away from Redux, and it's true. And it seems like I wouldn't say they're moving away from it. It's more like they're observing the different options a little bit more realistically. So like Redux still has its place, but it's not going to be used in every app like it was maybe like a year ago. But and with Redux form being so popular, it's so tightly coupled with Redux that there was definitely, an opportunity there to kind of create something that would help out a lot of people. I think this kind of fits into that area. I do have a question. Do you have to understand and know like Yup or what Yup is to use this?
No. It's totally optional. There are 2 props that or configs, depending if you're using a higher component in Formik. You can just pass your own custom validation function if you don't want to use Yup. There's just like a special prop for Yup if you're using it, just because it just was easier to integrate it. And if you do use Yup, it'll help you transform the error messages to make them flat and nice and match up without getting into like too much implementation details. There's one helper that helps if you're using Yup and makes things a little bit easier. But no, you do not have to use Yup. You can bring your own validation. You can use JSON schema if you want to. It's totally up to you. Formik's job is just to control validation, error messages, and values. But how you validate itself, what the validation is up to you. Should say Formik controls when things validate. Better put.
Yeah, and in that you're using kind of a config approach, right, to help with that validation instead of all the crazy hooks that were in there for the other things.
Yeah, exactly. So you have tight control over configuration. And yeah, again, if you like the Joy Yup syntax of the builder pattern, you can really quickly whip up extremely complex validation error messages very quick, in seconds. But if you need something custom, like you could totally just pass in your own function, and that's totally fine. So yeah, that's where, and I wanted that escape hatch, by design.
Yeah. So did you find that gave you the kind of, I guess, the structure and flexibility? Because like something like Mozilla has the JSON schema library, which works well, but it's kind of it's based on the JSON schema and how you edit that. So I guess it's limited on your customization, really. So was this for you like a happy mesh of all of that?
Yeah, it kind of was. It was like, I guess, and I don't know. I'm torn now with some of the recent API changes, but my initial thinking was, let's just make a library that solves for 85% of all forms. And if for 15% of the forms in the app, if they're customized because they do something like pretty wild, because you can do that with React, then maybe Formik isn't the best candidate. But if it's just like a sign-up form, then you should be able to do this really, really quickly and not have to wire things up, and you should also be able to stay dry. And so that's where my thinking was, like, just nail the 85%, and don't worry about the rest. Now I sometimes worry about, like, now people try, and I see issues all the time about people trying to use Formik in new and interesting ways. And sometimes I just answer like, hey, Formik's not for every form. I don't think this is a good candidate for Formik. I think you should probably pull this out and do this by hand. But that was sort of where my head was at. I think the other thing was that I realized that I was reading Twitter, and the React team did a poll of like the most frustrating parts of React, and people just like talked about it. And one of the top things was forms. And so that was another like thing I was trying, the impetus for me to like, okay, let's make something was, this is clearly a problem. And while React is so good at so many other things, it just doesn't help you very much with forms at all. So I was trying to just make things easier and more logical.
Yeah. And I don't know what you guys think, but I mean, for me as a developer, forms are those things that are boring and repetitive. So you have to do them, but it's not the part that you're excited about. So anything that makes that part easier and repeatable, it's a win for me.
Oh my gosh, I just figured something out, I think. Is your dad Shelly Palmer?
Yeah.
No way. He's
Yep.
like one of my favorite people to like read his blogs and follow on Twitter and stuff. He's like famous. I mean, in the consulting world, he's definitely famous.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that is Pops.
That's so cool. I had no idea. I just was I was looking on your LinkedIn, and then I saw him, and I was like, "There's no way that this is the connection." And then now it makes a lot of sense. That's so cool.
It's fun. It's definitely fun.
Yeah, I was going to bring up earlier. So you guys have both worked with your dads. Of course, Natters wasn't in computers, but it's very rare actually that we ever talk to anyone whose dad works in technology. I think that's a new thing that we'll see a lot more of. I hope that when my son, if he goes that route, that we could work together. But it's just not very common right now.
Yeah, it's something I truly, truly, truly appreciate. And I talk to all my friends, and they don't work with their dads. And just to work with my dad at all, I think is something that's special. But the fact that we're in the same zone is great. And he's such an amazing resource, whether it be like public speaking or just bouncing ideas off of, or some of the stuff that we're building for clients. It's just such an awesome resource to have him around to be a partner in this business is great.
That's cool. I did have a question about the open source portion of Formik. Just really curious. You're doing this. You had a client, a project for this, and you came up with it. I guess what made you open source it, and then how has that process been with contributors and all that? Is it, what's been your experience?
So I'd say that Formik is my most popular project. Before that, I had like a boilerplate that turned into more of a toolkit called Razzle, which is still pretty popular, but not to the scale of Formik. And so yeah, sort of getting my feet wet there. But so the answer to your question is I had started it from the we were very transparent. If we have an idea for, with our clients, if we think we can open source something, sometimes they're going for it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes I'll code something on my non-work computer. This was one of those things I was like, I think I can use this, but I'm not sure. And anyway, we worked it out with a client. They were cool with me publishing it. So that was cool. But as it relates to just open source in general, dealing with contributors, it was definitely something new. It was so cool to just see that people were using something that I built and then were willing to contribute their time and energy into making it better because they could use it and just because it was there. And then when I was at React Rally last year, I was talking to a bunch of I was asking of some other people around about who had some more experience, for some guidance and wisdom about how to manage it all. And at that point, Formik was not as big as it is now, is a couple thousand stars. And they gave me some good advice, which was that when somebody contributes, if you like their contribution and think about and deeply consider whether they should get contributor access to the project, only because that will enable them to and also incentivize them to keep contributing. Don't give them publish access, but give them contribution access on GitHub. And so I've been pretty liberal with that. Still ultimately have the final npm release, but getting people involved is huge, and maintaining momentum is huge, and something that I think is Formik's definitely. It's been a learning process for me, but I'm really excited about where it's going. And that's been a really, really great trick. Or I don't know if it's trick, just policy, I guess, to just be liberal and be nice about who gets to be a contributor, because you enable people to work on stuff, and people love that. I don't know. Have you guys felt any other advice there on that matter? Or
I agree with you useful? 1,000,000%. In fact, I think people definitely can really get too attached to their project and be no, everything, I have to control everything. But the second that I gave someone write access to my project, the contributions and also him interacting with the community was about tenfold what I could have done. And then I ended up giving him NPM publish access. His name is Monty Thakar, by the way. And he's actually taken over the entire project and has 7 other contributors. And we just got to 10,000 stars on React Native Elements, and he posted a big blog post about it a few days ago. And I literally barely even get to contribute anymore because it's all just being done for me. And anytime I want to go in there and change something or something like that, somebody just jumps in and does it for me pretty much. And it's actually maybe kind of lazy, but it's I don't think I've submitted a pull request in 6 months. And we have a very fresh library, updates happening every week. And it all was from me, just letting go. And someone, like you said, that was contributing, giving them access and giving them, an opportunity to work on a big open source project. And it just incentivizes them and then other people as well. Totally agree with that.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day that, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say from the other end of someone who's joined a, relatively popular NPM package that a lot of people are using. When I started working with React Navigation, I was helping answer questions and just kind of do little things, but then being added as a contributor, even just the ability for me to close issues and all of that, like that adds that whole other level of like that a sense of ownership, which I know for me, like it just made me, put that extra few minutes in or that extra thought into answering this or, reviewing someone's pull request. So yeah, like for me as someone who's been given that access, I feel like it upped the level of commitment that I brought to helping on that project.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think another trick pattern I've been sort of gathered is over the course is to use if you guys play with all contributors, you put people's like pictures and stuff on the README. Like that seems to also help a lot, giving people ownership and that. But I will say at the end of the day, like Formik is still something that I use every day and have specific needs out of. So I haven't gotten to the point where I can completely let go. And I think I could do better at this. I look and I'm in awe of how some of the people that work on massive projects manage saying no all the time, and knowing how to say no. I think I could do a better job of that, and something that I'm constantly learning and trying to improve on. But especially when it conflicts with something that I have in mind. And also, I've tried to stay true to the use case. People ask for features in Formik all the time because it's very frustrating to them when they can't use a library that they've used on every other form on this form that they're currently working on. And it just might not be a good fit. And sometimes I just have to sort of say that. But and other times, maybe there is something that or some solution. I've tried to, like, if Formik's not the right thing, then perhaps help the person just solve the problem. And oftentimes that's just with React. And I've seen that a lot too. But yeah, just being able to say no, I think, is something that has also been really, really interesting over the last couple of months. Which is saying yes is super easy. Especially, I'm sure, as you have more and more contributors, but being able to say no, I think, is something that is definitely a challenge.
Yeah, I agree, because you're trying to walk that line of like being kind and wanting to encourage people to, step in, but also protecting the project to make sure it's kind of along the lines of your initial like vision of kind of where everything's supposed to go. So, yeah.
Yeah, kind of shifting gears a little bit. One thing when I was reading through the README of Formik, and like just hearing your experience, it seems like you really started with this targeting React, and like Formik works on React Native. Like I haven't used it, but from the docs, like you state that it does. I'm curious, like from the onset, were you targeting React Native? Like, was that, a goal of yours for it to work there? And if not, like, what was that process of adding that capability? Because there are those differences that you outline in the README of just, there's no form element like there is on the web, and just there's different ways you have to interact with. So I'm just curious, like how's that process worked, writing a package that works on these two different platforms?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think I did not write Formik initially for React Native in mind. But that being said, it was within one. I think after it was trending on GitHub, I added the ability for it to work on. I added documentation for how it would work on React Native, and the escape hatch is required to do so. But you're right. There's no form element. But since we're all in Ajax land anyway, in just calling the way that the submit handlers work, it didn't really matter. And the other thing that on the React Native projects that I've used it on didn't seem to matter was just I don't know if it was just like luck of the draw, but by the way that by the way that Formik's API is designed, you just treat the React Native components as if they were some third-party input. The core of Formik, to answer your question, was using that same name trick that is used on the React docs, where you use the name attribute of the HTML input to determine the key that you're trying to update in state. And since there's no name key, you don't get access to the you do get access to the native event in React Native, but you don't get attributes that are passed through. That wasn't possible. So, but that's okay, because Formik's designed to work with any input. So you just treat that like any other third-party input that you don't have like raw access to the event on, and wrap it with a couple set field value or whatever the APIs you need, and from there, most people wrap. I assume everyone wraps has a customized version of text input, so you just slap in the Formik APIs you need, and you're good to go. So it wasn't too just getting JS React Native support wasn't difficult. To be fair, I haven't fully fleshed out React Native TypeScript support yet. Even though Formik's written in TypeScript, there's some really annoying realities to how challenging it can be to use React Native TypeScript and React TypeScript in the same package from a delivery perspective. There have been so far not great options for how to package up those types together. I use TypeScript every day as a side on every single application I write. So it's been that's still like to be solved, but that doesn't just Formik's not unique in that problem. What's likely to happen is like a Formik native package that has some types that are more specific to React Native, like gesture responder stuff like that. Yeah, so for now, some NEs are required where you would have perfect type coverage, but it totally works in React Native, and it wasn't that hard to add it later on. There's just sort of a tooling thing with TypeScript that I think is something that will probably happen over the summer.
Very cool. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Just like one, just kind of seeing like relative ease of targeting both of these platforms, but also just like the benefit of like a good API design. And then also it's very interesting hearing your insights on using TypeScript and just like the challenges that come along with it, because typing in JavaScript is still, at least at the level that it is now, like it's still relatively new, and there's a lot of those challenges, because I know there's a few people on React Navigation who are having similar issues with Flow. But yeah, just how typing it brings benefits, but it also brings some challenges when you're integrating with these different third-party libraries.
Absolutely. And what's been cool is that recently, as of I guess a couple months ago, Microsoft actually added Formik to the official TypeScript test suite. And there have been a bunch of Microsoft developers that are on the TypeScript team that have been really helpful in making sure that Formik's types are perfect and are compliant with the latest version of TypeScript at all times, even like submitting and contributing changes to improve them. There's like some type inferencing stuff that they made changes to, and that was just really cool to have it like be part of the language. And so like, and so is like Redux and Apollo and stuff like that. But it was just cool to have Formik be like official.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So what are some, I know you mentioned there was certain times when like Formik would not be something that you would use. Like, can you maybe mention something that may be like not a good situation to use Formik?
Sure. This sounds like kind of crazy, but I mean, so not React Native, but in React Web, like a search input that's like a real search bar. Like you don't need to have you could have but you probably don't need it. And you certainly don't. If you don't need validation, you should just ask yourself if you need Formik. You can use Formik now that has some helpers for field. You can use it out of convenience, even with or without. You don't need validation. But if you don't need validation, you might ask yourself, or you're doing something that is, I would say, there aren't a lot of that come to mind, but like some of the simple one that comes to mind, I always use is search. A search input, like at the top of Facebook, for example, like that search input, you wouldn't need to use Formik on. It has no form of validation, has a very complicated autocomplete, and really customized behavior you just need a text value for that. And so that's an example of when you wouldn't use Formik potentially. There was a time when it was more challenging to use Formik with wizards, but now there's a pretty cool wizard example. But that'd be another time when you might want to question using Formik, even with the wizard example that's provided in the examples folder in the source. I'm sure you could come up with a complex, multi-stage, dynamic wizard that is really not the best thing to code in Formik. I'm sure you could do it with it, but I don't know if it'd be like the best tool for the job.
So there's one form library that I've used, but I'm not a huge fan of it. I actually try not to use it, but I've been in a couple projects that use it, and I'm sure it's great for people that actually like it. It's called like Tcomb Native, and I know it's kind of like a subset or fork of the regular Tcomb library, but I've noticed it's like super hard to get control of all of the things that you need control of, like styling and stuff like that. And it ended up making I would have rather just written everything from scratch. Is it pretty easy to control how the styling and stuff works with Formik?
Yeah, so Formik actually doesn't do anything about rendering at all. And it was designed that way. It's just concerned with your logic. There are two ways to consume Formik. You can either use the render prop, Formik, or you can use the higher order component with Formik. They both do the same thing. It's just like a question of your style. And they inject the logic of your form into the component. So this stores errors, values, touch state, some metadata like whether the form is dirty, the initial values of the form, and then all your handlers like handle change and handle blur, and your handle submit function, handle reset, and that's it. And the rest is up to you. And that's what's cool is that it's a form library, but it doesn't actually render your inputs. And so you have complete and total control over the styles of your inputs. And actually, it's highly encouraged to make your own inputs and build your own little like Formik component, folder in your app, and just have 3 or 4 or 5, 6. I probably have like 10 or 12 Formik inputs that work with any Formik form that I can just swap in whenever I need that. And you can make whatever changes are required for your application. And then those are your input. I like to call them input primitives, and you just share them all around your app. And that's sort of what the impetus was for. That sort of came out of this administrative dashboard where I had these 30 forms and all these inputs, and having, being able to share inputs really, really, really well, but not necessarily the logic was super important. So that's how the design decision that went in there. And so, yeah, it's render props. So it doesn't actually end up rendering, even though it doesn't actually render the input itself. It just handles the logic. And so you are totally in control of how your stuff looks, and ultimately how it behaves.
Oh, very cool. I like that a lot. So we're kind of getting close on time. Is there anything that you would like to kind of go over, discuss that we haven't really covered yet? Or does anyone have any questions for Jared before we wrap it up? Okay, cool. So I think we'll go ahead and get to the picks. So I think we'll start with Spencer. Do you have any picks today?
Yeah, so my pick is going to be a blog post. It's on the React Native Motion publication on Medium, and it's called Animated Transition in React Native. And like, I know this is something that I've struggled with, and like, I think it's just kind of confusing. But the author just goes through and talks about this library, React Native Motion, and just kind of gives some really good examples. And something that really caught my eye was shared element transitions within React Native, kind of independent of your navigation solution. Because like, that's something that looks really cool, but it's one of those things that's really hard to do. So that's walk through in this article, and quick read, really detailed read, lots of good code examples in there.
Okay, Lee, do you have any picks?
Yeah, I don't really have picks this week. I wanted to first congratulate you guys, Nader, on the React Native elements. I was going to bring that up in my pick section, but I know we mentioned it earlier. That's pretty awesome. I work with React Native, or at least talk about React Native elements on a weekly basis, helping people to develop applications, and I always recommend that if they want to get started quickly, they can start with React Native elements, and then over time, kind of customize those as they need it. So that's awesome. I'm glad it's doing well. And just kind of reiterate, because I know when we were prepping and getting ready, we talked a lot about the changes in the guidelines, developer guidelines. So we can put a link out there with the picks for that, with the QR codes and the kind of changes there. I'd love to hear the listeners' kind of feedback on that too.
All right, very cool. Jared, do you have any picks?
Yeah, so we at the Palmer Group are actually going to be moving to React Native for web for almost all of our applications now. If you haven't checked that out, definitely a cool library from Nicholas Gallagher, formerly at Twitter. It powers Twitter Lite. It powers a bunch of stuff, and we're going to be moving all of our stuff there. But it's a really cool project. Basically, is the React Native API implemented with React DOM, and it's really fun stuff there. So it's got like fun stuff like React right to left support and style sheets implemented. It's awesome, and so we are very excited to be checking that out. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely worth it. And then the other let's see, the other pick I have is Suspense. I guess that's still something I've been playing with. I don't know if you all have been playing with it, but Suspense is really cool. Just playing with it, really excited about where React's going and how committed the team at Facebook is to pushing the limits. Suspense is definitely could be really game changing. Oh, and of course the third one, I guess 3 picks. Code Sandbox live sandboxes. Did you see that today?
Yeah.
Yes, I did. It's awesome.
That's so cool. So that is such a cool tool, and very thankful for it in the ecosystem. It solves a lot of issues. But yeah, that's my third pick.
All right. So I have 3 picks. The first is a book called What If? Serious Scientific Answers to Absurd Hypothetical Questions. And it's a really cool book. It's something that me and my son are actually reading together, and he's like 7 years old. But it's actually very scientific, and it goes over my head sometimes. But basically the idea is he has questions that are really crazy, but he actually tries to answer them in a scientific way. I think one of them was like, what if a pitcher threw baseball at the speed of light, and what happens when the bat hits the baseball? And then another was, what if the earth stopped moving and the atmosphere kept going? And it's really cool, and I recommend it. It's kind of a lightweight, fun book to read, but it also is has a lot of good information there. I learned a lot already. My second pick is I'm doing a blog post on Tyler McGinnis's blog, and also it's going to be a YouTube video about integrating React with AppSync using the AppSync client, but also the AppSync backend. So if you're interested in learning about that, check out Tyler McGinnis's blog when this video or when this podcast episode comes out. It'll be out by then. And then my last pick is, since we have Jared on the show, there's one of my favorite blog posts. I would say the top 10 blog posts that I've read in the last year. It's called, I'd pay you $500,000 a year, but you can't do the work. And we shared this around my work about a year ago when it came out. And it's actually written by Shelley Palmer, who is, I guess, Jared's dad. And it's really cool because it gives you a glimpse into, like, why, I guess, certain developers make a lot more than others, and like where the demand is, and kind of just his general, I guess, overview of the current situation with the limited number of talented developers in certain areas, and kind of like what type of money they bring to the table. And it was pretty eye-opening to me. It was super interesting to read. So I would definitely check that out. So
that's awesome. Yeah. I remember when he wrote it. It was we went on a long walk about it, and we talk every week. He's always come up with something new and great. But that's definitely I think it's one of his most read articles of the year.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. It was kind of I saw it all over the place when it first came out, so it kind of went semi-viral. But it was really cool because everybody I knew I shared it with, and we talked about it too. And I was like, this is cool. And that's actually when I started kind of following him and stuff. So
got it. Well, very cool. I will definitely let him know.
Okay, well, Jared, it's been really cool talking to you. Thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was awesome. You guys are great.
Totally, man. We'll have to have you back again sometime in the future for sure. Well, that wraps up episode 94 of React Native Radio. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.